The overhead lights in his office were too bright, the kind that make everything look clinical and cold, and I sat there thinking, this was not at all how I imagined my Tuesday ending. My hands were in my lap, folded too neatly, the way you hold yourself together when you're terrified of falling apart. Across from me, behind a desk that probably cost more than my car, Garrett Voss watched me with the kind of patience that isn't patience at all. It's just controlled fury wearing a calmer mask. "You're going to tell me everything," he said, "before you walk out of that door." How had it come to this? 3 weeks ago, I was nobody. I'm still nobody, technically. Nora Walsh, 29, emergency room nurse at Mercy General in Chicago, single mother to a 6-year-old named Sam, surviving on hospital cafeteria coffee, and the particular stubbornness that comes from having no backup plan. And then Garrett Voss walked into my ER on a Thursday night, bleeding through his shirt, and everything I thought I knew about my quiet, exhausted little life turned sideways. I should have just treated him and moved on. The first thing I noticed was that nobody touched him. The 2 men who'd carried him in, huge, stone-faced, wearing matching black coats despite it being September, they stepped back the moment the gurney crossed the threshold, like they'd delivered a package and their job was done. No family hovering, no one holding his hand. Just this man, somewhere in his mid-30s, broad-shouldered and pale from blood loss, watching the ceiling with an expression that suggested he found the whole situation mildly inconvenient. "Sir, can you tell me your name?" I asked, snapping on gloves. He looked at me. Not at the trauma bay, not at the equipment, at me. "Voss," he said. His voice was steady for someone losing blood. "Garrett Voss." I'd heard the name. Chicago hears the name Voss the way you hear thunder. You don't always see the lightning, but you know something's coming. Voss Group. Construction, development, logistics, and the kind of city contracts that politicians don't talk about at dinner parties. There were other stories, too. The kind that live in whispers and old newspaper articles that never quite land anywhere. But in my trauma bay, he was just a man with a laceration that needed closing, and I was a nurse who'd worked 3 doubles in a row and wasn't easily impressed by anything except a vein that cooperates. "This is going to need stitches," I told him, cleaning the wound. "What happened?" "Disagreement," he said. "With what, a fence?" The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. Something like that. He had dark eyes, not dramatic dark, not movie dark, just genuinely difficult to read, like looking at water that goes deeper than you expect. He watched me work with that same unsettling focus, not flinching when I numbed the area, not making small talk, not looking away. "You're not scared of me," he said. It wasn't a question. I once had a man come in with a fishhook through his thumb and spend the whole time telling me I was doing it wrong, I said. "You're considerably more cooperative than him." That got a real sound out of him. Not quite a laugh, but close. "Fair enough." When I finished, one of the stone-faced men reappeared to collect him. I handed him his discharge paperwork and turned away. That was supposed to be it. The next morning, there were flowers at the nurse's station. Not the gas station bouquet kind, actual white peonies, an obscene number of them, in a vase that probably cost as much as my electric bill. The card said only, "Thank you." V assumed it was for the whole station. I put my name on the rotation to water them and forgot about it. 3 days later, an envelope arrived at the hospital addressed to me specifically. Inside was a handwritten note, real handwriting, the kind people don't bother with anymore, and a gift card to the specialty pharmacy where Sam's inhaler prescription was filled. Enough to cover 6 months. I stood in the break room holding it for a long time. How did he know about Sam? How did he know about the pharmacy? That question should have been the end of it. I should have returned it. I knew, somewhere in the back of my mind, that I'd spent 3 years carefully not examining, that a man like Garrett Voss didn't send gift cards to nurses without a reason. But the inhaler cost $300 a month, and my insurance had changed in January. And Sam had had 2 attacks in October already. I kept it. He came back to the ER 2 weeks later, which is not something patients typically do voluntarily. No injury this time. He walked in during my shift, wearing a suit that meant business, and asked the front desk for me by name. My charge nurse, Phyllis, found me in the supply room with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. "There's a man in the waiting room who asked for you specifically, and the whole room got quiet when he walked in," she said. "Should I be worried about you?" "No," I said, although I wasn't entirely sure. He was standing near the exit, not sitting, like he didn't intend to stay long. He looked better than he had on the gurney. Color in his face, suit impeccably pressed, the kind of put together that comes from having people whose entire job is making sure of it. "Mr. Voss," I said, "Mrs. Walsh." His eyes moved over me briefly, assessing. "I wanted to thank you in person. The flowers were more than enough," I said. "And the other thing, that was too much. I can't accept that." "The inhaler prescription," he said, which confirmed he already knew I hadn't returned it. "Your son has asthma. How do you know that?" "I make it my business to know things about people I'm interested in," he said, without any particular apology in his voice. I should have been angry. I was, a little. But underneath it was something else, the uncomfortable recognition that I wasn't entirely surprised. Men like Garrett Voss didn't operate on accident. "That's not a normal thing to do," I told him. "No," he agreed. "Have dinner with me." I blinked. "Excuse me? Not tonight. Whenever you're free. Somewhere you'd actually like to go, not somewhere I choose." He paused. "I'm told I have a tendency to choose for people. Who told you that?" "Everyone, eventually." I almost said no. I had a script for no. Had used it plenty. Tired, single mom, early shifts, sorry. But there was something in the way he said it. That small admission, "I'm told I have a tendency," that was so unexpectedly self-aware coming from a man who'd clearly been told yes his entire life. "I get off at 7 on Fridays," I said. "I'd need to arrange someone for Sam. I'll have a car for you at 7:15, he said. "Your choice of restaurant." "I don't know restaurants like that. Tell me one thing you love to eat, honestly." "Good tacos," I said, expecting him to blink. He didn't blink. "I'll find the best tacos in Chicago." He did. It was a small place in Pilsen, 15 tables, cash only, and the enchiladas were the best thing I'd eaten in possibly years. We sat in a corner booth, and he looked genuinely out of place. Too polished, too watchful, but he ate everything on his plate and ordered seconds, and asked me questions, in a way that felt like he was actually listening to the answers. I told him about nursing school, about Sam's father leaving when Sam was 8 months old, about the way Sam had started collecting rocks, and could tell you the geological classification of every single one. Garrett listened with the focused attention of someone who isn't used to being surprised, and was finding it more interesting than he expected. "You could have gone to medical school," he said at one point. "Nurses do more of the actual work," I said. "Doctors get the credit." Something shifted in his expression. "I know something about that dynamic. The Voss Group. My grandfather built it. My father expanded it." He said it carefully, like reading from a document. "I inherited both the business and everything attached to it." "And what's everything attached to it?" He looked at me for a moment. "More than I'll tell you over tacos on a first dinner." I respected that. People who overshare too fast are usually performing, not sharing. That dinner led to another, then another. Always somewhere, I suggested. A diner in Lincoln Square, a Cuban place in Logan Square, that Sam's babysitter had recommended. Once just coffee at the hospital when I had a short break, and he showed up with 2 cups and a paper bag from the bakery down the block. He never seemed to require advance notice. He never required credit for the consideration. He'd met Sam twice by that point, both times accidentally. Once when his car dropped me home after dinner, and Sam was still awake at the window, and once when he stopped by on a Saturday, with no explanation beyond I was in the neighborhood, which was almost certainly untrue. Sam had looked at him with the evaluating seriousness only 6-year-olds deploy and said, "Do you know what kind of rock is in your driveway?" "Limestone," Garrett had said, without missing a beat. Sam's entire face had changed. "How did you know that?" "I'm in construction," Garrett said. "I know rocks." After that, Sam asked about him sometimes. Just is Garrett coming? In the casual way kids accept people before adults can talk themselves out of it. I told myself I was being careful. I was watching for the warning signs. The control, the manipulation, the slow erosion of my own choices that I'd heard about from other women, read about in the kind of articles that circulate after someone finally leaves. But what I noticed instead was that Garrett Voss almost never told me what to do. He offered. He asked. He waited. What I didn't notice because I was watching the wrong things was that I was already in it. I found out about Detective Alvarez on a Wednesday morning in the hospital parking garage when a woman in a gray blazer fell into step beside me. "Ms. Walsh," she said. "I'm Detective Alvarez, Chicago PD. I need 5 minutes. My first instinct was Sam. Something had happened to Sam, but she shook her head before I could speak. Your son is fine. This is about Garrett Voss. We sat in her car. She had a folder. The photos inside were not the kind I was expecting. Not crime scene photos, but surveillance photos. Garrett coming and going. Garrett meeting with men I didn't recognize. Garrett at a table in a restaurant I'd never been to, leaning toward a man whose face the camera had caught mid-law. The Voss Group has been under federal investigation for the past 2 years, she said. Bid rigging, labor racketeering, connections to organized crime in the city's construction sector that go back 20 years to his father's time. She paused. We believe Mr. Voss is aware of these connections and has actively worked to maintain them, even while presenting a legitimate face to the public. Why are you telling me this? Because you're spending time with him, she said. And because we believe you may be in a position to help us. I went very still. We're not asking you to do anything dangerous, she said, her tone careful, rehearsed. We're asking you to pay attention. Anything he says about his business, his associates, you want me to inform on him. We want you to help us hold him accountable. I sat with that for a moment. Then I said, I need to think about it. She gave me a card. I put it in my coat pocket and walked into the hospital and spent my entire shift moving on autopilot, checking vitals, running IV lines, charting with muscle memory while my brain turned the conversation over and over like a stone I couldn't set down. That evening, Garrett texted, Dinner Friday still works if you're free. I stared at the message for a long time. I didn't answer. 3 days later, I met with Detective Alvarez again. I told her I wouldn't wear a wire. I told her I wouldn't report on private conversations. I told her I'd answer general questions if asked. But I wasn't willing to be used as an instrument to take down someone I was. And I stopped there, because I didn't know how to finish that sentence without admitting something I wasn't ready to admit. What I didn't tell her was that I was going to tell Garrett about the conversation. I decided that in my car, driving away. If there was one thing I was certain of, it was that I couldn't sit across from him at dinner while holding this in my pocket. I was a terrible liar. I'd always been a terrible liar, but I didn't tell him right away. I kept the dinner on Friday. I sat across from him at a Thai place in Andersonville and watched him the whole meal, looking for the version of him in those surveillance photos. The man leaning across a restaurant table toward someone connected to 20 years of corruption. He noticed. He always noticed things. You're quiet, he said. Long week. Something's wrong. I'm tired. He didn't push it. We finished dinner. In the car going home, I almost said it 3 times and stopped myself. At my front door, he caught my hand when I reached for my keys. Whatever it is, he said low. You can tell me. And I should have told him then. I know that now. Instead, I said goodnight and went inside, and 2 days later, Garrett knew about the meeting with Detective Alvarez anyway. I don't know exactly how. I have theories, and it didn't matter, because what mattered was the call I got on a Monday morning. I need you to come to my office, he said. His voice was controlled in the way it gets when he's working very hard at controlled. Today. His office was on the 42nd floor of a building downtown that his grandfather had commissioned in 1978. The view of the city from up there is the kind that's supposed to make you feel small and significant at the same time. I didn't feel either. I felt like I was walking into something I couldn't turn back from. He was standing at the window when I came in, hands clasped behind his back, looking at the lake. You met with Detective Alvarez, he said without turning around. Twice, yes, he turned then. His expression was the one I'd never seen before. Not the careful consideration, not the almost warmth, but something underneath all of it, older and harder. And you didn't tell me. No, why not? I sat down without being invited, because my knees weren't reliable, because I didn't know what to say, because she showed me things and I needed to decide how I felt about them before I said anything. What did she show you? Surveillance photos. She said the Voss Group has been under federal investigation for 2 years. Bid rigging, labor racketeering, organized crime connections going back to your father. He was very still. And what did you tell her? I told her I wouldn't help her build a case against you. I met his eyes. But I want you to tell me whether any of it is true. The silence lasted long enough that I started to prepare myself for a version of this conversation I didn't want to have. Some of it, he said finally. Not all of it. He moved to the chair across from me, not behind the desk. He sat like someone who's decided to stop managing the distance between himself and a hard thing. My father ran a business that made deals I wouldn't have made, he said. Contracts secured through relationships that had nothing to do with merit, and some of those relationships involved men who operated outside the law. I knew this when I took over. I've spent 3 years trying to untangle it, which is, he paused, considerably harder than inheriting it, because the men involved don't want to be untangled. Correct. Are you personally implicated in anything criminal? He looked at me steadily. Not in ways I expect to be charged for. Some of the methods I've used to manage the transition have been aggressive, things I wouldn't discuss with a federal investigator. He paused. Or with you tonight. That's not reassuring. I know. He leaned forward, his forearms on his knees. What I can tell you is that I didn't pull you into my life to use you. I pulled you in because... He stopped, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked like he didn't know what came next. I'm not practiced at this, at wanting something that isn't a transaction. I looked at him for a long time. Why am I here, Garrett, in your office today after you found out? You could have just stopped calling. Because I don't want to stop. The simple directness of it sat in the room between us. I have a 6-year-old, I said. Whatever is in those surveillance photos, whatever Alvarez is investigating, if it touches Sam, I walk away. Not because I don't care about you. Because he comes first, always, and that's not going to change. I know, he said. It's one of the things I respect most about you. Don't manage me, I said sharply. Don't tell me what I want to hear. I'm not. His voice stayed even. I'm telling you the truth. I've spent 15 years in rooms full of people who say what they need to say to keep their position. You're the first person in longer than I can remember who talks to me, like I'm just a man. He paused. It's disorienting and I find I can't stop thinking about it. I wanted to be angrier. I'd been rehearsing the anger on the drive over, and now I couldn't locate it. There's something else, I said. Alvarez mentioned your father. She made it sound like he's gone. Like there was a falling out, or he disappeared. Something crossed Garrett's face then. Not the hard mask. Something younger and more tired than that. My father had a stroke 4 years ago, he said. He's not dead. He's in a care facility in Wisconsin, has been since it happened. He can't speak, can't walk. He's aware, the doctors say, in there somewhere, just locked in. He was quiet for a moment. I visit him every month. I tell him how the company is going. I don't know if he hears me. I go anyway. Why? Because he was my father, Garrett said. Because he made me who I am, good and bad, and I'm not ready to let that go. He looked up. I'm aware that's not rational. It's completely rational, I said quietly. It's just not convenient. Something shifted in his expression. Like a door opening in a wall you didn't know had a door. What I want, he said carefully, is to keep doing what we've been doing. Dinners, Saturday mornings. Listening to your son explain igneous rock formations. The corner of his mouth moved. I want to be honest with you about what I'm untangling and what I can't tell you yet. I want you to hold me to a standard I haven't held myself to in a long time. He paused. And I want to know if that's something you're willing to try, with all of that on the table. I thought about Sam. Sam, who slept through the night now without the nebulizer, whose inhaler prescription was sitting filled in our medicine cabinet, who'd asked me twice in the last week if Garrett was coming over. Not in the hopeful way kids ask about treats, but in the matter-of-fact way they ask about things that have already become part of the furniture of their lives. I thought about the women in those surveillance photos, who probably hadn't been asked, who'd found out differently, and I thought about the fact that Garrett Voss, who could have done anything else, had called me to come to his office so that he could sit across from me, not behind his desk, and tell me the truth. I'm not going to report to Alvarez, I said. I already told her that, but if I find out you've lied to me about Sam's safety or used our relationship to shield yourself from anything, I held his gaze. I won't just walk away. I'll make sure she has everything she needs. He was quiet for a moment, then, that's fair. I know it's fair. I'm not negotiating. I understand. He stood and something in his posture had changed. Loosened, almost. Like he'd been braced for something heavier than what came. Can I drive you home? Sam's babysitter has him until 8, I said. Take me somewhere with good soup. I haven't eaten and I'm exhausted. He found a small Vietnamese place in Uptown that had been there since 1987, and we sat in a back booth and I ate 2 bowls of pho, and he watched me the way he sometimes did, like I was doing something extraordinary by simply existing in front of him. And I let myself stop being angry entirely. The weeks that followed were steadier. Not simple. Nothing about Garrett was simple, but steadier. He was careful in a way he hadn't been before, less assuming, more asking. He told me things in pieces, when he was ready. That 3 of his father's old associates were pushing back against his restructuring efforts. That there had been what he called an incident that he couldn't discuss, but which had required him to be unreachable for 4 days in November. That the federal investigation was, in his words, being managed, which I chose not to examine too closely. In return, I told him things too. About Sam's father, who had sent 1 email when Sam was 2 and never written again. About my own mother, who lived in Phoenix and called on birthdays and asked questions about my love life in a way that felt more like cataloging failures than caring. About the nursing scholarship I'd partially funded by working weekends at a diner through all 4 years of school, and how I'd paid it forward anonymously when I finally had a small savings buffer to a fund for nursing students at my hospital. "You never told anyone you did that?" he asked. "What would be the point?" He looked at me for a moment. "I build things with my name on them," he said slowly, like he was working something out. "Buildings, contracts, leverage. It never occurred to me that the point might be to do it, and then just keep going." "Not everything needs a plaque," I said. He laughed, a real one, unguarded. "No, I suppose not." Sam warmed to him in the incremental way children reveal their true feelings, first by ignoring him, then by directing all conversation at him, then by the afternoon in December, when Sam fell asleep on the couch during a movie, and Garrett carried him to his room without making a thing of it, tucked the blanket up, and came back to the kitchen looking like he wasn't sure what had just happened to him. "He's out cold," Garrett said. "He does that," I said. "Thank you." He stood there for a moment, his hand braced on the counter. Then he said, "I had a younger brother. I waited. He died when he was 9. Accident." Garrett's voice was even in the practiced way. "I was 16. Our father he didn't stop. He kept working, kept building, kept expanding. I don't think he knew what else to do." He paused. "I think I became very good at not stopping, too. What was his name?" "Marcus." He said it simply, like he didn't often say it out loud. "Tell me about him." And Garrett Voss, who I had seen command rooms and negotiate contracts and look at men twice his size without flinching, sat down at my kitchen table and talked about his little brother for an hour. How Marcus had collected baseball cards. How he'd been afraid of thunderstorms and pretended he wasn't. How he'd made up songs with nonsensical words and sung them at full volume. How Garrett used to let him win at cards because the look on his face when he won was better than actually winning. When Garrett finally stopped, the kitchen was quiet and it was past midnight. "I haven't talked about him in probably 10 years, he said. "You should," I said. "People who loved someone should be able to say their name." He looked at me across the table. Something in his eyes then that I'd been pretending not to see for a while. "I'm in love with you," he said. "I don't think that's a surprise to either of us." It wasn't, but hearing it said out loud by him, with his hands folded on my kitchen table in the dark, my throat went tight in a way I hadn't expected. "I'm getting there," I said honestly. "I need you to know that. I'm not there yet, but I'm moving toward it." He nodded once. "That's more than I expected," he said, and I believed him. The thing about Garrett's world was that it didn't stay distant forever. By January, it had found us. I came out of a late shift to find a man I didn't recognize standing near my car in the hospital garage. He wasn't threatening. He stepped back when he saw me, hands visible, expression carefully neutral. But he handed me an envelope and said, "From Mr. Harlan Voss," and I stood there holding it, cold and confused, until he walked away. Garrett's father, the man in Wisconsin who couldn't speak. Inside was a photograph, old, paper-soft at the edges. Garrett and a small boy at what looked like a beach, both squinting against the sun. Garrett maybe 16, the boy younger, and on the back, in handwriting that looked like it had been written through effort, 2 words, "Take care." I called Garrett immediately. He was silent for a long time. "His hand has some movement," Garrett said finally. "He's been working with a therapist. I didn't know he was trying to contact people. He sent me a photo of you and Marcus." Another silence longer. "Are you all right?" I asked. "I don't know," he said, and the honesty of it cracked something open in me. I drove to his apartment that night. He opened the door and looked at me for a moment without speaking, and then I stepped forward and put my arms around him, and he stood there with his hands at his sides for a moment, before they came up around my back, and he held on like someone who hadn't let himself do that in a very long time. "I'm here," I said, against his shoulder. "I'm not going anywhere." It was the first time I'd said it and meant it completely, without the reservation I'd been carefully keeping between my words and their full weight. He pulled back just enough to look at me. "I know I'm a complicated thing to choose," he said. "I'm a single mother who argues with doctors and cried at a toothpaste commercial last week," I said. "We're both a lot." He laughed, and it broke the rest of the tension, and I stayed. 6 months later, Garrett's legal team finalized a cooperation agreement with the federal investigation. A structured disclosure of his father's network's historical activities in exchange for immunity on inherited liabilities, and a monitored transition of 3 remaining business units to compliant operations. He didn't announce it. He called me from his car on the way home and said, "It's done," in a voice that sounded lighter than I'd heard it. Sam's rock collection had taken over an entire bookshelf by then. Garrett had contributed 12 specimens from demolition sites, each labeled in his handwriting, with the geological classification and the project name. Sam treated them like artifacts. On a Saturday in April, Garrett took us to the lakefront. Sam ran ahead on the path, narrating everything at full volume, and Garrett walked beside me with his hand in mine, easy and warm. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Right now, Sam is listing the sedimentary properties of the breakwater," I said. "Maybe wait until he takes a breath." Garrett laughed. Then he stopped walking and turned to face me, and his expression was the one I'd learned to read by then, the one that meant he was about to say something true. "I want to marry you," he said. "Not today. Whenever you're ready, if you're ever ready. I want Sam to have a last name he can choose when he's old enough. I want the thing we've been building to have a name." He paused. "I've spent a long time building things for other reasons. This is the first one I've built because I couldn't imagine not building it." I looked at him, at this complicated, careful, slowly opening man who carried his brother's name quietly and visited his father every month, and had once driven 45 minutes in traffic to find the best tacos in Chicago because I'd mentioned it offhand. "Ask me again in the fall," I said, "when the hospital changes my schedule and I find out if I have weekends back. I want to say yes when I'm not exhausted." He smiled, slow and genuine. "In the fall, then." "In the fall," I agreed. Sam came hurtling back down the path at that moment, holding a small gray stone with both hands like it was a treasure. "It's basalt," he announced. "From a volcano. Can we keep it?" "Yes," Garrett said, already reaching for it to examine it properly. "Definitely." I watched the two of them standing there on the lakefront path, Sam explaining things with the total authority of a person who has never once doubted that what he loves is worth explaining, and Garrett listening with the focused attention of a man who had learned, slowly and imperfectly, that the things worth having are the ones you have to sit still for. It wasn't the life I'd planned. It wasn't simple or safe, or the kind of story that makes sense in a straight line, but it was mine, built out of a Thursday night shift, and a man on a gurney and a 6-year-old's question about limestone. And I had stopped trying to talk myself out of it. Some things, it turns out, are worth the complicated.